beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we'll be talking everything English Porter. Right from its history, style notes, recipe writing, my suggested recipe, and then I will show you some footage from my latest brew to this style with lots of hints and tips along the way. Let's get started with a brief history. The Porter is a beer style that dates back to the 18th century. It originated in London, England. This beer style enjoyed a huge amount of success back in its day and was originally brewed with just brown malt. Due to the brown malt, this meant it was originally brown. The Porter was at this time considered a strong beer, and it was usually at least 7%. The strongest versions were watered down and this became what is known as brown ale, and weaker versions became known as mild porters. The larger London breweries at this time became super cash rich due to the Porter's huge success and pioneered the first use of hydrometers and thermometers in brewing, as well as making large discoveries in the realms of mass beer storage and also conditioning times. The Porter style was so popular that after one brewery had one of its vats rupture, causing a domino effect, this created a flood known as the Great Beer Flood of London. Just one of these vats contained 610,000 litres of beer. As you can see, this had quite a large effect on the area on this day. After this matter was heard in court, it was ruled out as an act of God, giving no one responsibility. Times have certainly changed. The Porter style that we know and love today is very much an evolution of this original, and this style has changed with history ever since. This is really just as well, as this beer was reported to be something quite jagged and rough in taste that would certainly not suit the modern taste palate. Let us now have a quick condensed look at how the BJCP considers this beer style. Let's start with aroma. Moderate to moderately low bready, biscuity and toasty malt aroma with mild roastiness. May have chocolate qualities. May have some caramel, nutty, toffee-like or other sweet qualities. Low level of European hops, low esters, low to no diacetyl. Appearance. Light to dark brown, some ruby highlights. Moderate off-white to tan head, fair to good head retention. Flavour. A burst of moderate flavours that can be bready, biscuity with a mild moderate roastiness but no more. Leading flavours are usually caramel, nuts and toffee character, usually with secondary flavours such as coffee, licorice, biscuits or toast in support. Somewhat sweet with up to medium hop bitterness, much variety in this style. Mouthfeel. Medium light to medium body, moderately low to moderately high carbonation, light to moderate creamy texture. The overall impression being that this is a moderate strength beer with low bitterness and a variety of different flavours. And here are the vital statistics from the BJCP for the English Porter style at the bottom of the screen. Some of my viewers find it useful to screenshot and print what you see on screen now. I am glad people find it useful. Let's now look at how you would plan writing a recipe to this style. I will add before I start that there is much misunderstanding about this style. Quite often I will have what is called an English Porter, and quite frankly it is simply not. I have even had one that was dry hopped very strongly with Citra. Just plain wrong. There is also much crossover these days with stouts, even commercially, which is very sad to see. Firstly, your base malt will be pale ale. Go for the best quality you can here. Maris Otter or other quality alternatives that you can find. This is a malt forward style and your base malt will allow your speciality grains to shine. In this style your base malt will usually be around 75% of the grain bill. Brown malt is a popular choice for this style and I particularly recommend it for the somewhat unique mouthfeel that it offers, along with those nice rich coffee, nutty and toasted flavours and aromas. I suggest to use it at between 10 to 15% of the grain bill. It is to my mind the heart of this style. And then you will need crystal malt for those sweet flavours. I have been known to use up to 3 or 4 different types of crystal before for different flavours and complexity in the past, and this can yield good results, but personally I prefer just one crystal malt for my own taste, and I go for the highest colour I can. Experiment yourself and see what you prefer. Whichever way you prefer to go, I suggest that you add crystal for this style at between 8 to 10% of the grain bill. Then I would suggest you use a chocolate malt. Interesting and varied results can be obtained with the different varieties available, including things like chocolate wheat and also chocolate rye if you can obtain it. Go easy with this though. I would suggest a maximum of 3% to keep within this style. It should also be added that some brewers also like to use smoked malt, special B and other powerful speciality grains that have a strong flavour for this style. To my mind, this can actually be very interesting, but they can take it off style if competition is your aim. If you do use anything like this, then it is really best to keep it in the low 1% of your grain bill. Otherwise it will simply overtake the beer and it will simply become something else. Not good if an English porter is your aim. Hops wise, it's really best to stay British. I'm not saying that European hops will not work, but really to keep it in style, keep it British. If you desire an American porter, then I do have a separate guide for that also. Ideal hops for this style will be East Kent Goldings and Fuggles. Keep the IBU within the 18 to 35 range and match it to the 4 to 5.4 ABV, so only stronger versions have the higher IBU. This will give you the correct balance. When it comes to yeast, British types are obviously a great way to go with lots of choices. Fermentis SO4 is a solid way to go that many British breweries use for this style. Having said that, personally these days I favour Kveik yeast and recommend Voss Gjernes, Ebergarden and Framgarden for this style. A great way to go from grain to glass in just a week. Naturally, this is also a style that is popular to add a flavour to create a hybrid. Vanilla, for example, can work very well, but any flavour additions I find is best to go very minimal on. Of course, your own personal taste should be your only guide. Let's now move on to a recipe that I recommend for this style. A few years ago now, when I first started this channel, I shared a London Porter recipe here. This recipe is without doubt one of my favourites ever, and for sure my favourite for this style. I find that the ratios work very nicely and it has a good history of success on various levels, including competition, not only for myself but for others also. Scott Walker is an example of this, winning gold at this competition in Australia and best of show also. Always great to see, and seeing as the aim of this channel is to help people, it is always appreciated when people let me know how things are going, good or bad. After many people giving me such good feedback on this recipe, it is now common for people these days to ask me if I've made any changes since. I will take you through this now before I share some video footage of my latest brew with extra hints and tips added. You can see here on screen the grain ratios that I've settled for this recipe. See this video's description for a 21 litre version of this with weights for everything in both metric and imperial. There is also a link for the recipe for Brewfather. These grain ratios for me are almost set in stone these days and have been for a long time. You might go 12% for the brown and 10% on the crystal, but that's about it. What does change for me from time to time is the actual types of these grains that I end up using. This can be experimentation with new types of chocolate malt, for example, as I mentioned in the recipe writing section. The hops I choose to use can also vary some. Mostly I just used East Kent Goldings, but Fuggles are also very similar. Yeast-wise, I've certainly settled on using Voss Gjernes Kveik, but again you may prefer something different. What I would suggest you do is brew this recipe as is, and then start experimenting from there for actual direct comparison. I will now show you some brew footage and finish up with some images of the final beer brewed to this recipe with some tasting notes also. The first thing to decide on with a brew of this type is if you wish to separate the dark grain within your mash. Some brewers add the dark grain late in the mash or at the start of the sparge, as they feel this leads to a smoother and sometimes less astringent flavour. Personally, I do not do this, but you should certainly experience the difference for yourself and see what you prefer. This applies to any brew that involves dark grain, not just this one. As you can clearly see here, I added all of my grain at once to the mash. For this brew and with my brews for quite some time, I've been brewing manually with my Brewfather. Well, I say manually, but the controller has handy support for two functions without the need for an app, and I do utilise both of them. The first of these is the preheat timer, and I've always set this via the controller rather than the app. It just seems far less fuss, to be quite frank. Fast and easy always gets my vote. The second feature is the setup of step mashing. Once again, this is fast and easy just using the controller. I simply prefer actually being in control myself and not having to rely on software being bug-free and the radius restriction of Bluetooth. Brewing certainly doesn't have to be fancy, there are plenty of ways to set timers after all. If you want it, then brewing software like Brewfather also has a mode for brewing that will give you all the timers you would need without the need for Bluetooth range. When brewing a beer of this type, expect there to be a fair-sized hop break resulting in this foam on top of the beer. If you experience a great deal of this foam, or actually an underwhelming amount, then this could point to pH that is either too low or too high. Ideally, mash pH should be in the higher region for dark beers, but anywhere between 5.2 to 5.7 will work. It is highly probable that you will see these effects more with a darker brew if your pH is needing balancing, due to the high acidity within dark malts. This foam, which contains protein and waste products like fats, should start forming as you hit higher temperatures leading up to a boiling point. Having a good hop break allows the wort to separate from the trub, meaning a lower protein level, making it more biologically stable, meaning it will be harder for contaminants to take root. The lower protein in suspension will also combat against chill haze and promote clarity, so all very useful stuff to be aware of. For this particular brew, I was able to get hold of hop flowers instead of pellets. Whilst I see various benefits with pellets, I'm a long-term brewer and often miss brewing with hops in this form. Call it nostalgia. Like with pellets, it's essential to give these a good stirring in to help them drop down and to release that all-important oil. By having them drop down as quickly as possible, the oil will move through the brew quicker, as oil will always rise in liquid. This was certainly a fun brew, and I have to say made smoother by the modifications I have made to my Grainfather, like this false bottom. And finally, here is a photo of this brew freshly served from my kegerator using the Intertap stout spout. There is no nitro added at this point, but I am considering it. Just don't mention that to my wife, please. Tasting notes from beer judges have been recorded as follows. Great lingering creamy head, nice dark brown with highlights. Biscuit with a little bread, several sweet notes. Complex and very true to style. Here are a few more pictures. The one on the left is one of mine and the other two are from others that have brewed and loved this beer in the past. If you search the Grainfather Facebook groups, you will find more. This now brings this video to a close. If you have any questions, then please let me know via YouTube or Facebook. I do hope that you found this video to be useful, interesting and enjoyable. If appropriate, then please like this video on YouTube, and if you've not done so already, then please subscribe. I regularly post new content. Happy brewing!